And now I turn to Waltraud Heller, the representative of the Fundamental Rights Agency. I give you the floor. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. I'm really sorry that I can't be there in person. It would have been very good to reconnect or connect with also new people in person, but I hope we can do that also going forward. I was asked to speak more specifically about the long-term perspective on holistic protection. And this is quite a challenge because it's a very complex topic. I followed your meeting from this morning on, and actually protection was used in very different ways. And I would like to sort of also reflect together with you also on what does protection really mean. And I will share a few slides for that purpose. I don't find it. Okay. So now, sorry, it's different how to share in every IT tool. Can you see the?
Now we can, yes, we can. This is
Okay.
not the
Okay.
presentation view, but we see the now it's fine.
Not the presentation.
Now, something turned on, then it's okay.
Is it the presentation view?
Now we see the editing view of your presentation.
That's strange because I see the presentation view.
Never mind, it is okay, and my colleagues maybe can fix it. So go on, please.
So first of all, what are we talking about when we talk about what needs to be protected? So the agency has worked in its work with a concept of defining the civic space in 4 pillars, which I'm showing here on this screen. The first is the legal environment. So that's the laws that have an influence or impact on civil society work. That's, of course, freedom of association, assembly, and expression, but also, as you are very well aware, also the side effects of other laws like counterterrorism laws, anti-money laundering laws, etc., transparency laws. The second is the resources, the access to resources. We have spoken about this today. On the one hand, it is about the availability of resources. So which resources are available? But on the other hand is how are they accessible? And you have made some points about the and the bureaucracy in access. A third point is also what is being funded. So is it service provision that's being funded, or is it actual protection of the sector that is being funded? The third area is participation. So the access to the decision making and the challenges in that, and how participation and consultation often don't work, too short deadlines, lack of feedback, etc. The fourth and last one is the safe space. So the threats and attacks that civil society experience. I come to my next slide. I think it's important that this morning we had protection about all sorts of different levels. Coming from the overall enabling environment. So that's the laws, the policies that have an impact. The civil society sector itself. So at the level of the sector, what is the coordination and cooperation that needs to be done? The level of organization when organizations are being attacked, and also the individual. What happens when individuals are being attacked? And I feel that in the discussion so far, we are always throwing these different levels together. But I think in order to then decide what needs to be done, it's really important to conceptualize which type of protection is needed at which level. So the first distinction I would like to make is between, on the one hand, promoting and protecting an enabling environment as such. Is the slide not there?
No, it's okay, yes.
Yeah. Promoting and protecting an enabling environment as such on the one hand, and protecting defenders and organizations on the other. And this distinction is important because actually the tools for these are quite different. And below you see this box on civic space monitoring. And that means the facts and the evidence that we need as a grounding and as in order to argue both for the promotion of an enabling environment as well as protection of defenders. Today was already mentioned several times the Council conclusions on civic space of March 2023. And I really recommend to have another look at these. I did in preparation to this meeting. And it's very interesting because both the enabling environment and the protection of individual defenders is actually included in there, sometimes not with super specific words, but enough to refer to it in advocacy. I would like to look more specifically now at the 4 pillars of civic space and the challenges and attacks that happen in these that we need protection from. So the first one is the legal. We need to tackle an overall restrictive legal environment in order to protect the overall civic space. But there are also direct legal attacks on organizations and on activists in the form of strategic lawsuits against public participation. Then we have criminalization. And then we also have the intended as well as unintended side effects of various laws, such as transparency laws, EU Facilitation Directive, and others. The next is the resources. So I already mentioned the lack of resources, the access. We have also seen discrimination in access to resources. We have seen politically motivated funding cuts much higher than we had thought. So every year, the Fundamental Rights Agency does a consultation with its civil society platform on the challenges experienced. And politically motivated funding cuts was almost 30% of our respondents that they said they felt this. And politically was not further defined. So it can mean 2 things. It can mean due to the political situation, or it can mean because of the topics worked on. We also see foreign agent rules and then the administrative burden in application and reporting. In the area of participation, there is mostly a lack of certain things. So we see less direct attacks, but still no enabling environment on participation. There is lack of information, of adequate rules, of access, lack of feedback. That is one of the highest actually in our consultation, that policymakers don't give sufficient feedback to those who gave input on what was taken on board, what not, or why not. There is very rarely meaningful participation of MITs experienced by civil society as a tick the box. There are very scattered participatory bodies that sometimes are called participatory, but are at best consultative, maybe often only informative. There is also lack of resources on good participation, and there are not always the appropriate tools and processes. And finally, the fourth, the safe space. So here we know also a lot from our consultation on the types of attacks. So direct verbal threats and attacks offline and online is by far more than half of our respondents. There's also the issue of an overall negative narrative about activists, about the sector, about the work they are doing. There are disinformation campaigns, digital attacks and surveillance. Again, surveillance, we were quite surprised or shocked to see that almost 20% of our respondents said they think they had experienced surveillance just last year, just in 2023. There are physical attacks, unfortunately, as well. We have not seen examples of arbitrary arrest, to some extent, though, among environmental defenders for very short periods, and administrative harassment. So this is just the big picture, and this is the basis for what we need to talk about when we talk about protection. How to protect against these things. And I think for the sake of our meeting now, I will first show you another slide on what we call holistic protection, because protection very often is seen as a more narrow thing on, protecting maybe against legal and physical attacks. But I started this chart with 4 items around security and protection, and over the last weeks only, actually, as we have started to talk more about protection, this has grown to so many. But I think it's important because it's important to understand this complexity and to understand what we're dealing with. So I just want to run through them very quickly. So this is now more at the level of organizations and of individual defenders. So this chart is not about the overall enabling environment. This is now really not about the promotion part of the environment, but really about the protection part of organizations and defenders. So there's the physical protection against physical attacks. That could be, I mean, you know, you're all working in this area, but it could be anything from safe locks and safe windows to bodyguards. We have that actually in Germany, for example, the government has provided, how do you say, yeah, bodyguards is not the correct legal term, but has provided personal protection to relocated defenders from some countries because of the death threats that they experienced. Digital attacks. Socioeconomic is maybe a more unusual one in there. And I would like to thank Jada, who is probably still in the room, because that came from a discussion that we had. It's really about the economic safety in which activities can happen, both for the organization, but also for the individual. And part of protection is that there has to be no stress around salaries, for example. And we know that donors often only, well, don't pay necessarily respectful salaries or let alone competitive salaries for the civil society sector. Health, that's both physical and mental health, which is actually linked to some of the other things that are happening in terms of attacks and economic pressures. Resilience, which is related with health, is how to be resilient in an environment where you're constantly under pressure, and what helps. Community is my latest addition to this chart. It comes out of a conversation we had only last week about the need not only for individual resilience, but for collective resilience and the strength that we get out of community. And here, I think it's community can be, of course, in a local community, can be in a community of other activists. But I think a very important aspect here is the community among activists across different countries, which you are doing with this meeting, but which is not yet happening very often, but could really help both in terms of mutual learning, of course, but also in terms of sharing what's happening and just having a space where people understand what is being talked about and just being able to talk freely. The narrative is the only one that is maybe at the crossroads between the overall environment and the organizations and individuals, but I decided to put it in this chart because we see the impact that the negative overall narrative has on organizations and on individuals and on their work. And then the last one in this chart is the legal protection. So in terms of attacks, strategic lawsuits, what is the legal protection? We see, for example, that there is very little funding from donors for financial aid, for legal aid. Or if strategic litigation is being funded, very often only the legal component is funded, but strategic litigation has a number of other components, including advocacy, communication, etc., that are then normally not being funded. So this is the chart. Later in the discussion, I would be really interested in your feedback on this chart. And if you see that maybe something shouldn't be there, or that if there are important parts still missing. So let's look at the different levels. Now I'm back at the 4 levels that we saw before: the enabling environment, the civil society sector, the organization, and the activist. What can actually be done for protection? So at the level of the enabling environment, it's of course advocacy, but not only for laws, but for the whole picture and all the 4 pillars that I outlined before. It is cooperation, maybe sometimes with unusual aspects. It is international and EU law, and we've heard Ingrid Belander speak about how EU law was used. There is a very interesting handbook, and Hannah Sumatz, who is in the room, can tell you more about that. They developed together with ECNL ECNL, Mariana is also there. So a handbook on how to use EU law to protect civic space, which is very interesting. But we have also seen the limitations, and what Balázs said at the end of the first panel on the limitations of legal processes, and what Vera said about the length of that, which can be not just frustrating, but actually can come too late as well. Then we also have the international institutions, and I want to bring them in because they haven't really been mentioned at all this morning. I think we are sometimes a bit, all of us, a bit Eurocentric. I think there are very interesting tools in terms of protection, both for the enabling environment as well as down to individual defenders that the international landscape offers, and where sort of the counterparts in the United Nations, for example, tell us that they get very rarely requests from EU-based civil society. So, for example, the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders or the Special Rapporteur on Environmental Defenders. Then there is the level of the civil society sector, the entire sector. So here, coalition building is important, but I mean, speaking at a meeting in Hungary, I have to say that you are always the good example that we give when we speak about coalition building, because the way you have developed your cooperation over the years has really been, yeah, exemplary on how this can be done. Important is the cooperation among civil society, but I've put this in the chart. It looks obvious, but it sometimes isn't. And maybe for you in Hungary, it has become obvious, but we see in many other countries that there is still a lot of competition between organizations. It's competition working on the same topics, working with the same constituencies, trying to reach the same policymakers, trying to access the same funding. And it's really important when we speak about protection that this competition has to be overcome, because there is a bigger purpose, especially when the pressures increase. Important here it is also not to cooperate just with the own country, but also think of other countries. I know that, and we will come to that, but there is still not enough funding. Donors don't really have that cooperation really on their radar. Sometimes they do at the national level, but the cross-border cooperation on civic space in particular is not yet very developed. And then, of course, there's peer learning, including across borders. Then at the level of the organization, here we come to the holistic protection, that the chart that we saw before. There is an element of organizational development and management practices that we see from our consultation that there is a need to be improved. Another one that doesn't come very often up is preparedness. So what we see a lot is reactive protection work, but it's important to do preparatory protection work, developing crisis plans, developing strategies. Yeah, I've mentioned UN Special Rapporteurs. Here, you will see, if you look closely, that the international institutions that are mentioned in the top level at the enabling environment are no longer all mentioned at the level of the organizations. And that is because some of them don't have the mandate to work on individual cases, like the Fundamental Rights Agency, for example, or the OECD, which does excellent work on the overall enabling environment. But here there are the United Nations Special Rapporteurs, the Council of Europe commissioners, and in some countries where they are allies, also the national human rights institutions. And it's a bit the same for the individual activists and defenders. So I'm coming to my last slide, and sorry, Mera, I sneaked that in after sending you the PowerPoint, because in the morning I realized that we need to talk about also who needs to act, because not all the actors were mentioned this morning. So we have, of course, the member states, and I'm putting them first for a reason. They haven't really been mentioned, and in the Hungarian context, they haven't been mentioned for a reason. But civic space is largely national legal competence. So there is a limit to what EU institutions and international organizations can do in this area. And this is why I listed the member states first. The European Commission, we have heard Ingrid's entire presentation, so I leave it at that. There are also other EU institutions, some not so known. For example, the Economic and Social Committee has been very active on civic space issues. I think I've seen Jonut in the room first, right? But the Parliament has also published a very important report on civic space. The Council conclusions I mentioned already. But of course, in terms of practical support and legislation is first and foremost the Commission that can be active. And we heard about the CERF funding. Other international organizations, I've talked about this, Donors. Someone mentioned it this morning, but donors is really crucial. How should we say that? So the Fundamental Rights Agency, we advise in particular the EEA and Norway grants on how to better support civil society under pressure. We also work to some extent informally with the SERF colleagues. And we really see that there's a conceptual gap between the ambition that donors have in supporting civil society, very honest and authentic ambitions, and what they do in practice, both in terms of what is being funded. I mean, there is hardly, apart from the German government, I haven't found any public donor yet that has, but maybe we just haven't discovered them, yeah. But no public donor, to my knowledge, has funded safe doors and safe locks and safe windows. No public donor has funded safe computer software for working safely. So there is still quite some gap and some advocacy to be done with donors on what holistic protection means and what the funding needs are in this regard. Then civil society organizations. Of course, they have to be listed. I think, unfortunately, there are some things that only civil society organizations can do here. And that is especially at the level of the organization and at the level of the individual. We have had quite a number of conversations also about resilience, about mental health, and so on. And we've seen that really the approach has changed since COVID, which is a very positive development. There are a few good examples, but there are few. There is one private donor that was OSF, which has now finished this program, that gave top-up grants to their grantees on protection. And I can later say more in the Q&A if you're interested, but that's very interesting because they let the grantees do whatever they wanted in terms of protection. And grantees did a lot of very different things, ranging from health schemes to buying hiking boots for their staff. Yeah. So civil society organizations also need to act. And then I think another important point is to be creative with other partners. So later this week, several of us in this room will be in Bulgaria at a conference regarding the newly tabled foreign agent law in Bulgaria. And the Bulgarian colleagues are organizing this conference one-on-one together with business associations. And they have found businesses as an ally on this topic, coming with the argument of foreign investment. And then also the arts is often an interesting ally that maybe could be explored more. There are others. I mean, for example, there were psychologists, associations of psychologists who supported for free the coaching of activists under pressure, etc. So with this, I come to an end. I know it's complex. It's maybe more complex than we think when we look at it at first. I hope I could sort of unpack some of the complexities, and I'm really looking forward to our discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can very much connect to this holistic approach that of protecting civic space. Even though I'm a lawyer and I see the entire world through the eyes of a lawyer, I very often have to explain to others that if we concentrate only on legal protection, that then we are lost. Maybe I would add something to the individual level you've been talking about. I don't know if you've covered earlier or not in your work, would be the recruitment of the next generation of activists and human rights defenders, because young human rights defenders and activists may have special needs, others than we old human rights defenders have. Now I would like to open the floor. In the remaining 20 minutes, we'll have the opportunity to comment. We have moving mics. Can we just there? Yeah, thank you very much.
Hey Val, good to see you. Thank you, Val, and good to see you. I'm Janut. I don't know if you see me. So I'm very happy to see that all these charts are developing.
No, but I recognize your voice.
And yeah, we had the chance to talk many times about this idea of resilient communities. And when we define communities, it's not just, our bubble, but to go to our supporters, to citizens that they donate, for instance, or volunteer for CSO, but most broadly going to the trade unions and employers. And I'm happy that you mentioned, that our Bulgarian colleagues, they succeeded in bringing in their coalition the business sector in Bulgaria to resist towards this attempt of one of the parties that it's scoring like consistently 17-18 in the rounds of elections, and then they are pushing this foreign agents law and LGBTIQ and so on. So what I want to say that in your preview, in the before last slide, it was important for me to see that you look to this idea of building broader coalitions, but we should mention always the people to understand that broader coalition doesn't mean just broader coalition of CSOs, NGOs in our country. Broader coalition means also bringing these parts of civil society that we tend not to work too much with them, that it's the business community and trade unions. And I think this is a recipe for success, because you mentioned in your presentation that we are reacting only when we are under pressure, and then we don't be prepared for this situation. So I think that this is let's say a path forward of building this broader coalition with the other two sides of civil society, that they have more membership, and at least the business sector, they have much more tools to pressure the government. And my last observation is on this slide, the idea with different tools that we could use and institutions. But let's look also to your institution, to FRA. I know that you cannot put in your presentation this, but we agreed in Warsaw in our final declaration that what we want to see is more role, more engagement from FRA, and more, how to say, in terms of European Commission, because Ingrid is here. Hello, Ingrid. What we want, we want FRA to be assigned more work in this area, because it's once when CSDF, Stefan Batory and Ökotárs is writing a report, and it's totally different at the level of Parliament and Brussels when the report is done by FRA. So this is a thing that it's in our letter that we didn't follow up, or it's not follow up by the new, let's say, leaders. But this is a key issue for us for the following years, and we should talk about it. And I think we should put it even in your presentation as a conclusion of the meeting today. So I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. We will connect some questions and remarks if we have.
For Ingrid, may I address a question?
Yes.
Okay, Ingrid, thank you for the figures on Hungary, on successful applicants. Of course, we are very happy that there are so many organizations that are recipients of Citizens' Equality, Rights and Value funding programs. But do we find somewhere, the situation on per country on recipients of funding? This is my first question. And the second question to you, Ingrid, is that for the next serve, do you envisage any, let's say, regional distribution of the funds? Is not about Central and Eastern Europe, but we had this feeling, and that's why I would like to see the figures first, that we end up again with very highly skilled organizations that are in the border between consultancy and real CSO. Of course, that they have huge departments for writing proposal, because they are also tendering to different tenders for consultancy consultancy for EU institutions. And in a way, you know, this idea of serve, when we started with Vera and with Eva, with this policy paper, that was the first step that we call it values instrument. It was, you know, to reach these small NGOs and NGOs that, you know, they really do a change, let's say, and they are the real watchdogs in European Union. And I have a bit the feeling that at least in the last call, we have more and more, you know, this type of organization that are at the border of let's say, the mission that we would like to, mission-based organization that we would like to support. Thank you, and sorry for being so long.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Vera.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitations, Ingrid and Val, and your participation. I have two questions mainly directed to Ingrid. I don't know how much chance you had to listen into the panel discussion before, but there were two issues that I would like to raise here. One is on civic dialogue. You mentioned also that in the mission letter of Commissioner McGrath, the civil society platform is included, and also there are initiatives from the civil society side to develop better structures for civil dialogue or dialogue between the institutional system and civil society. How do you see, if you see, do you see any, how we could move on this? In cooperation between the Commission and civil society. So one question is regarding possible next step on dialogue. And the other, we talked an awful lot about SERVE. There have been many proposals how to improve its modalities, while everybody said it's a very important instrument and we should defend it and protect it. But anyway, yeah, I guess work in this area also must start quite soon with the planning of the new MFF. So what do you see in that, if you see anything on that at this point? Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? We still have some minutes for some further questions. Yes?
Thanks a lot, Zoltán. Zarandi, again, if I may. Both of you really kind of electrified, woke me up even more than I woke up before. I was awake before. It's a very rare occasion that Hungarians are, you know, congratulated from Brussels on anything, and I'm very proud to be here again. That especially on Waltraud, that you, both of you, basically highlighted that cooperation and coalition building has been successful in Hungary, looking at from Brussels, which is very good news, and I'd really like to convey that to our readers in our media, because I'm representing a small media outlet as well. It's also very important in Waltraud's message that competition is okay, but cooperation should overrule in our approach, both from Brussels and locally, because we are in the same boat, and this boat is sinking pretty rapidly. It's a kind of Titanic, kind of 5 minutes to midnight in Hungary in many respects, and therefore it's always a very, very important message to hear. You also highlighted the importance of peer learning. And I'm coming from, originally, one of my hats is education. So I would be very interested in your thoughts on what your message would be, both of you, on the education, the civic education sphere, the civic education, kind of the educational policymakers, not just at the ministries, because they are hopeless in Hungary for the time. There's not even a ministry in Hungary for the time being, but for the non-formal education establishment, the independent educational system, the still kind of freedom-fighting Hungarian universities. So this whole lifelong learning exercise, the establishment which is under current threat and attack from the government, these bastards, sorry. So we need your support for that, also in terms of money and also for policy making. And finally, maybe the importance of building bridges between the media landscape and the civic education, the civic sphere. I would be very interested in Ingrid's view on how SERV program or the DG Just would consider any kind of direct support, oxygen or financial kind of lifeline to the still existing media outlets, the independent media outlets in Hungary, which are really badly struggling for survival. And also, if you have any thoughts on my approach, perhaps my suggestion is that media and civic sphere are twin brothers in fighting for liberty, and they should perhaps be supported hand in hand. So maybe a synergic approach to support the media and people working in the media, in the independent media, and civic society could be supported and quickly. Unlike the European institutions' work, as I said, Titanic is sinking. I know the European Commission will survive the Hungarian Titanic, but Hungary would like to survive Europe as well. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a little bit less than 10 minutes, so I would like to give you the floor, who are online, for your answers. First, I would ask Ingrid.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your questions. It's indeed sometimes we hear you. We hear that the situation is grim in Hungary, and from our side, we're trying to support as much as we can. What we know best here in DG Justice is, of course, the programs that we are managing, the SERV program and the Justice program. And I have asked my colleague Elena to put the link to the SERV results in the chat of this online call. I know that people in the room don't see the chat, but maybe the organizers can share that later on. So you will find the information about the recipients of grants in that website, and you can see from where the countries they're coming from. What we don't have is any earmarking on countries or regions. So the calls are setting the priorities, and we receive applications from whoever in the European Union that want to apply, and then projects are selected based on merit. So that's why there are no target earmarked countries or regions that we have done upstream. So that is about the first questions. On civic dialogue, the platform, yes, it was announced that there will be a civil society platform set up in the new mandate. As you probably guess, we are reflecting internally on what that could be. I've very briefly shared with you some of the thoughts that we would like it to be a permanent structure in the Commission that allows for a dialogue with civil society organizations across a range of policies. But we have not yet discussed these ideas with other services outside our DG or with incoming political leaders. So this remains still a very internal reflection, so I cannot share with you any further firm ideas about the next steps. But I'm sure that this will be high on the agenda of the incoming commissioner. Also, the same goes with the preparation for the next financial framework, the MFF. Yeah, the budget, the EU budget in a very bigger perspective has many aspects. What we know is that funding will be more linked to conditionalities, which we have already put in place under this, MFF, we have the conditionality on rule of law, we have the reform package, we have the charter, horizontal enabling conditions for the structural funds. So that will be an element that will most likely continue and be strengthened. But then how the different programs will be set up there, I don't know. We are currently asked to do an impact assessment of the current programs and see where things have worked and not worked and the gaps. So that's where we are at the moment. On civic education and lifelong learning, there is also other programs, even if SERV does not focus specifically on education and learning. I do believe that those topics can be integrated in the priorities that we have. How you promote the EU values, how you build capacity can also be done through education and learning activities. So I think that if you are creative when you look at the calls, you can also fit in actions there that I think would fit. But there are other programs, for example, Erasmus Plus, which is a huge program where I don't know the details, but I'm sure that there is an aspect of civic education there. The same goes with the media. We are working with other services, is principally the DG Connect, the Information and Technology Service. They have different programs on supporting media. SERV has funded specifically campaigning and awareness raising for CSOs, especially, for example, building social media strategies and so on. But that is not the main focus. But again, I think those aspects of actions can also be fit on a broader scale. But there are many programs, but here today can only speak of those that we are managing ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it would be a good idea to put the documents you sent us in the folder, in the shared folder that are accessible through those QR codes for the attendees. Thank you very much for being with us. And now I give the floor to Waltraud.
Thank you. There were quite a lot of points, and especially Zoltan's points would really sort of even merit a separate proper discussion. So I can't probably go into detail here. The first is on the next generation. Thank you for that point. I already included it into my version of the PowerPoint. I think it's a crucial point that I know I haven't heard it a lot in the discussion, but it is very important. And next generation doesn't necessarily mean young people only, I think, but means new, fresh people who start engaging. On the Fundamental Rights Agency, UNOT, of course, for me in my head, this was covered under EU institutions more broadly, but I'm changing it to spell out the which organizations. For the Fundamental Rights Agency, I can give the firm commitment that FRA will continue working on civic space, probably even more than in the past, but we are still waiting also for decisions on funding from our side. As you know, we have a new director, Sirpa Rautio. She came to Hungary. I think Hungary was actually the first civil society roundtable she did. So this shows you also the importance she has on the topic. We hosted a larger workshop on civic space in September, where we really brought together the institutions with various civil society actors who do monitoring along a specific methodology. So it was focused on monitoring the workshop. But what we take out of this as the Fundamental Rights Agency is, on the one hand, we will continue reporting on civic space. So I haven't mentioned this, but maybe for those of you who don't know the agency's work so well, since 2018, we published every year a report on civic space in the EU, the challenges, the patterns of challenges with concrete examples. For next year, we decided not to do that because, frankly, the patterns don't change. We know the patterns now, and we want to focus now for this next year on what exists in terms of enabling environment and protection, and where are the gaps. So we always do these reports with national research in each member state and our 3 observer countries, candidate countries, and with a consultation with civil society. And I would really like to invite everyone in the room to fill this consultation. I know it's a bit painful to fill another consultation, but really the more answers we have, the more we can use the arguments, and we're really trying to use them well, the data. And what we will therefore do is we will map out what exists in terms of monitoring initiatives, who monitors the civic space and how, what exists in terms of participation. And here I'm looking at Ingrid as well, also in reference to the recent recommendation on participation, and what exists in terms of protection. And we know there isn't much that exists in a structured way. There are here and there examples, but this is why we need this in writing, so that we can then make a very informed point on what is missing. And I really invite civil society partners to continue using our reports and the evidence for your own advocacy. You can also go further with your recommendations and your arguments that then we can do as an EU institution with the specific mandate that we have, but use the evidence, use it to take it forward. Jono, to your point on trade unions, absolutely taken. And as you spoke, I thought of another one that we have seen as an ally on civic space, and that was some churches. So I think we just need to be creative also on who can be allies. Another point here is the environmental defenders. It's still seen as two separate spaces in many countries, but of course, environmental defenders, they defend environmental rights, human rights. They experience pretty much the same issues, and it's still a bit of two parallel worlds in terms of advocacy, in terms of thinking about protection, etc. On this, Vera, on the civil dialogue, I think Ingrid has answered. I want to pick up on something that Zoltan said in the beginning when you said it's nice to be praised. I want to add something to that, because I think that NGOs across the EU and actually beyond have a lot to learn from all your experiences and your work in Hungary. And there were some events already organized to learn from that. But I think there could be more. And I come back to my points on donors, also inviting also, yeah, SERF offers it to some extent, but also organizations to apply for that, apply for hosting spaces where people can be together and exchange and learn from each other, and very much involving the Hungarian organizations. I was at the 3-day training a year ago in Hungary with Hungarian activists on how to support each other when working under pressure. It was eye-opening. It was also to some extent a confirmation, but it was good to feel it. And I think we from the institutions, we need to be more often speaking with you. And I'm really sorry I can't be here today. I think this is important. And I'm glad our director went to Hungary first. But maybe we can also, when there are concrete things to be discussed, I'm very happy to set up smaller informal calls just to catch up. With the Fundamental Rights Platform, which is our civil society network, we have now started every 2 months an informal update call on civic space. Vera has been participating and a few others in the room as well. But this is an open invitation to anyone in the Fundamental Rights Platform or associated somehow to come. It's a mutual update from FRA side, of course, our update, but we also need to hear what is going on and your updates both on what is happening, but also on the activities that you do to address them. And in this way, we can have more synergies and also learn from each other in that space. On civic education, I think we don't have the time to go in detail into civic education. I think it's crucial. But I also think that a lot of civic education that I see is very intellectual and focused on the brain only. And I think it's really, really important for people to experience what they are learning. So when we speak about participation, it can't be a presentation. It has to be something where people think together in a participatory way about participation, just to give an example. And I'm not an expert on civic education at all. I know there are a lot of initiatives. I think the Council of Europe is doing a lot, and ODIHR also to some extent. But also here, probably, there is a lot of parallel inventing the wheels going on. And it could be relevant to really also bring people together on this topic and learn from each other. And maybe also increasingly from contexts outside the EU. You know, if we spoke about protection today, we are still in this EU bubble. Latin American civil society have done fantastic work on protection. There is a very interesting publication developed from women Latin American women human rights defenders on protection. And not all of it is relevant or applicable for the EU, but it's very inspiring and creative. And maybe we should also try to create spaces that only unite the EU organizations, but really think about also what we can learn from the outside, and including on civic education. I think again in Latin America there might be some really interesting examples on that. Maybe the last point: media and civic sphere are twins. Yes, totally. There is a few areas where actually the protection in the media sector is better than on civil society. So on the one hand, there's the Media Freedom Act that we didn't speak about today, an EU piece of legislation in this area, but there is also the Council of Europe's platform for the protection of journalists, which we have tried to highlight as a good example on something parallel that could be developed for human rights defenders in Europe as well. So I think we have to come to an end. So from my side, unless there are further questions, but I'm also happy to follow up after the meeting for any more detailed conversations. But thanks for the invitation.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that the conversation will be continued, and I would like to say thank you to both of you for joining us from the distance and for your presentations as well. And I would like to thank all the participants for being with us this morning. We will continue this afternoon. After a lunch break, we will have a little bit less than 1 hour lunch break, and the lunch will be served outside here in front of the room. Let's meet here 2:15. Thank you.